This is Teaching High School Social Studies, a survival guide for first-year teachers. Let's start with an introduction. What do these videos contain? Future videos will contain ideas, materials, and links to complete lessons for every social studies lesson I've ever done, with a particular focus on a few certain topics. I'm more experienced with U.S. History 1, U.S. History 2, political science, and some government and some civics, so particularly those lessons. If you're taking one of those classes, this would be the area to look. Why am I doing these videos? For a couple reasons. First of all, my first year teaching was absolutely awful. I cannot tell you how terrible it was, and odds are yours will be too. I've never seen a first year social studies teacher not be incredibly stressed and incredibly overworked. I went to a good education school. I went to the college in New Jersey. It's ranked pretty well. I did well, and needless to say, when I graduated, I knew how to do very little. Even though I had a positive student teaching experience, I just didn't know what I was doing my first year. And odds are, you're going to be in the same boat. So I have a lot of compassion for that. And for some reason, new social studies teachers have to seemingly reinvent the wheel year after year. And I think this is ridiculous and completely preventable. So the reason I wanted to do these videos is because I think it's absurd that first year social studies teachers don't have a place to go to just find lesson plan ideas or even complete lessons. Why do you have to reinvent the wheel every night and spend 2-3 hours on a new lesson plan when I and other more experienced social studies teachers have already done that? You should take what I've done and take what you like, throw out what you don't, and make new stuff rather than just reinventing the wheel from scratch. It's ridiculous. So just a little introduction: what social studies should and shouldn't be. Let's start with what it definitely shouldn't be. This is stuff you probably got in education school, but I just want to reiterate what social studies definitely should not be. So it shouldn't be, here's a bunch of facts about the past. Please now memorize them and spit them back to me. That's just terrible. If your teaching is based around facts about this is what happened in the past, and you're jamming factual information down your students' throats, they're going to hate you. They're not going to like social studies. Maybe 1 in 100 will have some kind of passion for the past, but most of them aren't going to like you, and they're not going to see really the whole point of social studies. And just as a general hint, if you can't answer why am I learning this with a legitimate answer that a teenager would care about, you're failing your students. Remember, you can't just expect your students to love this stuff because it's quote unquote important. You really need to be able to answer that question for just about every lesson you do. What social studies should be? It should be critical thinking centering around the students making very difficult and subjective judgments. That's, judgments where they're going to disagree with each other about the material to sharpen those skills in their real lives. There's an utter lack of critical thinking or ability to reason in our society today, and these skills are really, really valuable, and that's what you should be doing. You should be constantly debating with your students, and your students should be debating amongst themselves about really difficult opinions about the past. In the typical class, this is what you should be doing. You should be presenting some controversy. The students should then debate while you moderate and even score them, and I'll get back to that in a second. That should be the bulk of what your class is. This will save you a lot of time and energy, and at the same time, to kill 2 birds with 1 stone, it's going to make your class really exciting, and it's going to save you a ton of time planning lessons because you don't have to cram material down their throats. You don't have to spend 3 hours on a lesson plan. You can present a very brief amount of material and have the students debate. Students love this, and it saves you time too. So I just have 4 quick tips for you. Try to go through them as quickly as possible. Tip number 1 is metaphors. This is also, an anticipatory set, but I just want to hammer this home for you. Whenever possible, start a lesson by relating the material to something that your student body intrinsically talks about, something they're inherently going to be interested in. One of my favorite metaphors is my metaphor for the American Revolution. It's not my metaphor. Historians often relate it to this. I ask the students, when your parents disagree with you, when teenagers disagree with their parents, how do they disagree? What's their method of disagreeing? And who's more right and why? And that's a metaphor for the entire unit, and I keep coming back to it, to the British and the Americans in the American Revolution. And the students will say things like, oh, when parents want something, they jam it down your throats and they say you have to. And when kids want something, they pout and complain. And that's a perfect metaphor that I keep coming back to between the British and the Americans. And then the second part that you might not have gotten in education school is, whenever possible, make your assignments not only about analysis of the past, but also about the present, also about the students' actual lives. Make them compare their current lives to the past, or the current world to the past. Tip number 2 is notes. There is an economy of words for notes. Use too many and your students learn nothing. Make the notes literally as short and simple as possible. And higher order thinking is going to come from what you do after the notes, not during. Really, if you have more than, I'd say, 7 or 8 sentences of notes a day, you're giving too many notes. You should be, I'll do the method I use below, but more than 7 or 8 sentences, you're really done. And in those sentences, you should use as few words as humanly possible. Again, there's going to be copies of my notes for every lesson I've ever done in this series. You'll see that more later, but you really got to shorten the notes as much as possible because students don't learn from them. Distinguish between the words your students will and will not write using a different style or color font from those they need not to. So here's just an example note. Again, the short note followed by a long question that the students have to think about and debate about. So the note just says, Thomas Jefferson attacked the pirates. I can't really shorten that anymore, so I'm using my economy of words. And then note the class debate. So the note is incredibly short. The students will copy down as quickly as possible, and then they have to read this thing, and then this is a technique I use. I literally go off to the side of the classroom and say nothing, letting the students debate with each other before they're going to debate in front of the class. And that'll bring me to my next slide. All right, tip number 3 is class discussions. Absolutely critical. Grade all class discussions. Students should be rewarded for doing the essentials. Class discussions, both in written form and in oral form, are the class. That's the whole point of a social studies class. And if you're not grading class discussions, then the students have no motivation to do that. If they're not being, quote unquote, paid for their work, then they're less motivated to do that. It's not just extrinsic motivation here. They really like debating. Students love arguing back and forth. And if you reward them for that with a grade, they're going to come in every day thinking, oh man, all the other classes I have to write and I have to do all this stuff, but here I get a grade just for speaking. And they tend to be very motivated by this. Grade all class discussions. How do you do that? As the students speak, put their names on the board and add check marks to give them feedback. Put X's next to students' names for misbehavior, or this is a big one, failure to pay attention to other students' opinions. One of my big pet peeves is when one student will say what the previous student just said because they weren't paying attention. That's not acceptable. They have to listen to the other students too. This is a great method for class discipline. It gets the students listening to each other and not the focus on you the entire time where you have to scream and yell at them to constantly be quiet. And my final tip is assessments. Good social studies teachers, in my opinion, are effectively English teachers. This is going to save you a lot of time in your first year. You should ask, again, controversial or subjective questions about the past. For example, were the British, too controlling before the American Revolution? Were they the cause of the American Revolution? Or was it the American whininess? You tell me, using evidence from the past. So you're going to ask a controversial or subjective question and spend significant class time having your students write and revise grammatically correct, coherent responses. You're effectively an English teacher. You don't have to teach something new every day. You can spend a lot of time having your students write, read, and revise their opinions, revise each other's opinions, and that's going to save you a ton of time, make your job a lot easier. You don't have to stand in front of a room every day yelling at students to be quiet. All right, so I hope you enjoy this series. There's going to be lessons for pretty much entire of US 1, US 2, and there's also going to be some political science stuff. And hopefully I can help you get through your first year. If you have any questions at all, you can email me at the links below, and I'm always here to help you. And have a good luck in your first year teaching social studies. It's not easy, but hang in there.